All right, so today we're going to begin a new series. And so if you have a Bible, electronic device, you can turn to Matthew chapter 7. We're going to be there in about 20 minutes. I'm going to explain why. So one of the firm foundations of our church is that we believe in God's word, that it is authoritative, that it directs us in our lives. But with that, so like all of our teaching is based on that. But what's unique and challenging about today is as we begin a new series, one of the challenges that we have to do is we have to introduce the topic of the series during the first week, but then also teach the first truth. And so that just takes a lot of time. So I'm going to spend some time setting up a kind of a philosophical idea of some of the things that's happening in our culture. And I need you to understand it because I think many of you are probably aware of this. Some of you aren't. And the reason why I want you to know this is in case you encounter someone who goes through this, but also my confidence is all of us will go through some element of this at some point. So today we're beginning a new series. It's going to go either 7 or 8 weeks. And that is uniquely rare for me not to have it completely settled, but there's one topic I'm debating of whether or not to add, and so I'm praying about that. But today I'm going to set it up, and so here's what I want to do. I want to get us all on the same page. And in the late 60s, actually in 1967, there was a French philosopher, Jacques Derrida, and he wrote a book called Of Grammatology. And what he was examining in this book is the complexity of words. And he was really dealing with the tension between the written word and also the spoken word. And his premise was that words are way more complex and deeper than we often understand. That what happens in communication is the listener or the reader simply filters it through their own lenses. So whatever is their cultural influence, whatever the bias that they might have, that they filter it through. And we get this. We all have had this both in good and bad. Nothing is more frustrating than when you're trying to communicate with someone, especially in an argument, and they're not hearing what you're saying. They're reading between the lines. You guys ever had that happen? And it goes both ways. Like they say something back and they mean it one way, but you process it another way. And that was kind of what he was dealing with, is that we naturally will just take words based on whatever is convenient or easy for us, what's natural for us. And so his challenge is that we need to go through a process to really dive in and to examine words. And the idea that he had is that he wanted people to critique the word, to try to strip away what is incomplete, what is maybe untrue, what is broken or biased, to strip that away so that what you have in its place is truth and it's solid. And he coined a phrase, and the phrase that he coined to talk about this process is deconstruction. And this is a phrase that has become very popular in our culture. But his idea when he looked at deconstruction was he wanted to actually make the thing stronger, not weaker. So from his perspective, if you went through a healthy process of deconstruction, you would strip away what was broken or what was weak, but you would replace it with what is true and what is strong. So the end product would be stronger than the beginning. He had no concept of stripping things away just for the sake of getting rid of them. And so he became a cultural influence. And initially, his ideas were understood and they were implemented, but through the decades, they began to change. So he wrote in the 60s, and so in the 60s and 70s, most people took this influence and they applied it initially to literature, but then more specifically to philosophy. Then in the 80s and 90s, this started to change where people started to apply this logic of deconstruction to other things that were more systematic. So they were looking out at governments, at business, at whatever the rhythms of culture was within their communities. And it led to really the popularization of critical theory. If you've never heard that, critical theory is the idea that if something is broken in the world, that there's a good part of it that is systematic, and so you need to critique it, you need to evaluate it so that you can find if maybe the people in charge are corrupt, or maybe there's something that it's unwise or not well thought out, whatever it might be. And so like in the 80s and 90s, that became the popular way that this was applied to life. Then in the 90s and 2000s, we began to see it expand, where people were critiquing things of entertainment, of media and art. But then basically around 2010 to where we are today, something radical happened on multiple levels. First, people started to make it personal. They started to look inward. So like up until this point, this concept of deconstruction was being applied outward towards systems and structures, but now it was begun to be applied inward, where people were looking at their own identity, their own beliefs, what they had been taught, and even specifically with religion, and then specifically with education. And people began to look inward. But another radical change was many people in this process started to do the first part of deconstruction without the second part. They started to look to find faults, but instead of reconstructing with truth, they just began to get rid of anything that they could find that was not healthy or complete. And we see this evidence in what we call the cancel culture. The cancel culture that we live in today, the goal of it is to find something that someone has done wrong or something that is broken. And if any part of it is broken, then you throw everything out. So you can have a person who has done something bad 20, 30 years ago, and it does not matter what they've done since that moment. If you can find that in their past, then they are disqualified. The same thing happens and is applied toward businesses and churches. If there's any element of what's going on that you find, either based on a group opinion or your own personal opinion, if you find something unhealthy, then you just throw everything out. And so this radical change started to impact our culture and how we think, and became very popular in social media. That people would talk about deconstruction, and it almost became and has become a badge of honor. If you can find fault, if you can cancel something, then it puts you on basically your moral high ground and allows you to feel better about yourself. Now, as I say that, I'm very sensitive that I realize it feels like I'm attacking this group. I promise you I'm not. What I'm acknowledging simply is the tension in which we live now, because this is the mindset that is training us and future generations. And so in this, many people began to live their lives looking for faults. But here's the problem with it. The problem with this mindset is it's not making people and things stronger, it's actually making them weaker. And my heart breaks for those who go through this. Again, this is why I'm saying I am not in any way throwing shade at them, because many of the people who have begun this process of deconstruction are doing so through pain and through hurt. Well, what's happening is they're looking at things that they have experienced, things that seem true to them at one time, things that have been taught them, and through witnessing hypocrisy and experiencing letdown and evaluating things and finding it wanting, through this process, through their hurt, through their pain, through their disillusionment, they're finding no other way except to reject it all. And again, I'm seeing the pain and the hurt. I have a friend who I would say I would probably classify him either has gone through the process of deconstruction or is very far along the process. When he heard I was doing this series, he graciously reached out to his community, other people who have or are going through deconstruction, and he asked them, he said, my friend that's a pastor is doing this series, will you be willing to share with the reason why you deconstructed your faith, why you walked away from the church? And many people responded. And he sent me literally pages and pages and pages of response. And as I read through them, what I saw over and over, there were many different reasons, valid reasons, many things that I understood. But what was, I think, from my perspective, that unified all of them is underlying there was a lot of hurt, a lot of pain. There had been people who had been damaged by religion, people who had been abused, people who had been manipulated, people who really built their lives on ideas and it didn't come through for them. And so there was hurt, there was anger, there was frustration, there was vulnerability, because now in their lives there's anxiety and insecurity because their foundation that they had built their life on had been stripped away. So there is nothing in my heart that is persecuting, attacking, or trying to shade individuals who have gone through this. Just the opposite. What I want to help us understand is that deconstruction doesn't have to be damaging. It doesn't have to be destructive the way that our culture is telling us it does. Deconstruction, when done correctly, can actually be not only a wonderful thing, I would even say to you, I believe, and I can prove this today, that it's a biblical thing. That deconstruction in and of itself is not bad. It's only bad or harmful when you don't reconstruct with truth. And the reason why I say that is when we look at our perfect example of Jesus, this was a major part of the reason he came to the earth. Jesus came to deconstruct what was broken in culture. Jesus stepped into a situation where the religious leaders for generations had taken something that was initially good, the law of God, and they distorted it as a way to control and to manipulate people. They added to God's laws, man's laws, and they taught them as if they were equal. So when Jesus stepped into our reality, part of his ministry was to deconstruct that. If you read passages like Matthew 23, It is Jesus just tearing into these religious leaders, helping them understand that you took something that initially was good and you turned it into evil by damaging people and doing it for your own selfish needs and wants and desires. I mean, he started to refer to them in the scriptures as blind guides leading the blind into ditches with no ability to help them out. Jesus' rebuke of them wasn't that the law of God was bad, it was that what they did to it was bad. So in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says, I want everyone to understand, as you hear my teaching, and as it's radically different from this religious group, I want you to understand this. I did not come into this earth to do away or to abolish the law of God, just the opposite. I came to fulfill every single letter and dot of it. That's what Jesus said. And what he was doing was deconstructing what was broken so that what they could have in its place was actually truth and was actually strong. And so that's why Jesus said things like this in Matthew 7:6. And Jesus said to them, the religious leaders, well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites. As it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. You leave the commandments of God and hold to the tradition of men. Jesus was deconstructing, and his followers that came after him followed this example. To tear down what is false, to tear down what is a lie, what is weak and unsustainable, and replace it with what is good. I think about a few examples. I love this. The first one, the Apostle Paul traveled on his missionary journeys, and he came to this community called Berea. And he began to share with them how Jesus was a fulfillment of their scriptures. So we would call it the Old Testament, but it was the Jewish scriptures, how Jesus was the fulfillment of the prophecies and all the foreshadowing that went into it. And this is what it says about the Bereans. It says, they received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. I love this imagery. They're like, man, this is awesome. We love it, but we're going to test it for ourselves. And so what they did is Paul said something, and again, their hearts received it with joy because it seemed to be true, but they didn't stop there. They wanted to go and to evaluate it. And if Paul would have said anything that was false, then they would have deconstructed it. But instead, what they found was truth, and so they owned it, and it radically changed their lives. I think about what the Apostle Paul said to the church in Corinth. In 2 Corinthians 13:5, he challenges them individually. Examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Or do you not realize this about yourselves, that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you fail to meet the test? And what he's telling them is to deconstruct. Examine yourselves. Test yourselves. See if there's anything that you're building your life on that is sinful. If there's anything you're building your life on that is false. I mean, Paul says the same thing to the church in Rome. Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to the world. So get this, don't mimic the world. Don't follow the pattern of the world. Don't conform to the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. How do you do that? That by testing, you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Critique the world. I mean, this is what Paul is saying. Deconstruct the world. Examine yourself. Test things. 2 Corinthians 10:5, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive to obey Christ. If something is false, you tear it down. This is what Paul is saying, but you replace it with what is true. And so again, I just want to say, deconstruction in and of itself is not bad, but the way that our culture has taught us and trained us is absolutely unhealthy. It's unwise. To tear down, if anything, it has any element that's broken, to tear it down and to get rid of it. That's not wise. It's not what Jesus is calling us to. But to deconstruct and to replace it and to reconstruct with something true and something solid is wise and it's healthy. And when we look back, I mean, even as a nation, there are so many good things that came from deconstruction. I mean, just a few that I don't even really need to explain, but the end of slavery came about because there was a generation courageous enough to deconstruct what everyone else embraced as true and to look at it and to realize how unhealthy and how unbiblical it was. I would say the civil rights movement, women's rights movements, worker rights movements. I would even say what's been really healthy from deconstruction is the accountability that's been raised in the religious environment. People who have discovered unhealthy, abusive, and manipulative practices that have been a part of religion for years. So there's so much good that's come about from deconstruction. But if we're gonna be fair and we're gonna look at the good, then we have to also acknowledge the negative. There have been some devastating things that I can't even exaggerate, devastating things that deconstruction has led to. I think the worst, from my opinion, is the sexual revolution. In the 60s and 70s, what I would assume begun as a good thing, from all that I understand from studying it, what began as a good thing, that people were acknowledging that there was an unhealthy double standard between men and women. Men could be promiscuous, they could operate sexually however they wanted because they didn't have a fear of pregnancy. And so men acted one way, but women were expected to act differently. As a result of that, many women were forced into early marriages. Women were forced into relationships where proper sexuality was not taught. They were oppressed, and there was so much negative to that. But in unhealthy deconstruction, instead of raising the bar on men, they just lowered the bar on everyone. And they told people that you should view sex just like you would any other appetite that you have. The same tension that we see in the scriptures in Corinthians. That if you're hungry, you should eat. If you want to have sex, you should have sex. It's nothing more than just a physical appetite that you have. And so we taught this to a generation, and they taught it to the next generation. And the result has been devastating. Both Christians and secular leaders have studied this, and they are in agreement. It's one of the most devastating things that has ever happened to our world. Why? Because it's led to increased divorces, which means it's led to single-parent households, which can be devastating to families. Since Roe versus Wade, as a result of this, over 62 million babies have been aborted. We have seen the rise of the pornographic culture that has led to more sexual abuse, more human trafficking, more addiction to pornography. Again, you can just trace it all the way down. One of the most devastating things. Why? Because they deconstructed, but they didn't reconstruct with truth. They deconstructed what was bad, and they just stripped everything away and said, treat it however you want. And I would say the same thing, and the same line is moral relativism, something we talk about often as a church. That at some point we started to tell generations, you get to define morality, you get to define truth however you want. That if it's good to you, if it feels right to you, you should do it. And so everyone gets to define their own truth. And I think, I say this, I know this sounds super condescending as I say this, but if you have just an element of intelligence, you realize how illogical that is. To say that every single person can define their own truth, but yet this is what we've told the generation. If it feels good, do it. Not only do it, but embrace it as truth, and everyone around you needs to support you in that. And so what's happened is we've stripped away moral absolutes. We've stripped away what is logical and good, and we've told the generation we basically are experimenting with them. And the result of it isn't people are more secure, people are more healthy, just the opposite. The numbers that we see in young adults and teenagers is that mental crisis is on the rise, that suicide rates are on the rise at the greatest level of any generation. Why? Because we stripped the foundation from people and told them, you decide what is true. And so we've seen the devastating effects. We've gotten rid of the good with the bad. We've just got rid of all of it. And so that's the danger. And so this is where we are as a church, is we're starting a series where we're looking at what does it mean to deconstruct? What does it mean to then, in a proper way, to reconstruct so that what we're left with is not weaker than where we started? And so I just want to tell you, who is this series for? Well, I'm going to first begin who it's not for. And I want you to give me time to explain this. Who this is not for. If you've already made up your mind that you are completely over with God, you don't believe in God, you're maybe even militant against God, you have a closed mind to it, this series is not for you. And I'm not saying that because I'm saying you aren't of value, you are of value. But that is a completely different discussion. So that's not what this series is about. This series is beginning with this premise, that God is real, that God is the creator, and that God has revealed truth to us. God is real, God's the creator, God has revealed truth. So that's where I'm beginning. So who is this series for? It's for all of Christians, all of people that know at some point in your life, you're gonna face some challenges. Some things that were foundational in your life are gonna start to be stripped away. It's for all of you so that you can understand how to do this in a healthy way. So it's for believers who are struggling. It's for people who want to believe, but they have very serious questions. And then there are for those who, they don't know if they want to believe, but they're open. And yet there are some things that feel maybe illogical, that maybe feel untrue. And so you're just with an open heart saying, hey, I'm open to hear. That's what this series is for. Those are the people that I'm speaking to today. And so here's what I want to do. I want to begin with an object lesson. So when I was thinking about this series, and And I prepare months in advance for series, like I begin the process of planning and just studying and thinking about. And so as I was thinking about the whole concept of deconstruction, one of the mental images that kept coming to mind was the game Jenga. And I just want to be clear, this is not actually Jenga. This is something completely different. This is tumbling tower. And what that is the no-name version that is cheaper, okay? So, but basically the same thing, right? So Jenga, if you've never played it, which I would imagine if you haven't or seen it, then where have you been? But what Jenga is you take these blocks and you put them in alternating direction and you stack it, and then two people typically compete against each other. And what you do is you touch the blocks and you try to find the ones that are loose, and then you take it out. And so if you can find one that's loose, you take it out and then you put it on top. And so what it does is you just alternate back and forth. And the more that you do this and you find the blocks that are not secure and then you put them on top, what it does is it makes it less stable with more weight on top, so it becomes more unstable. And then eventually one person is the one who tries to get one block loose and the whole thing comes crashing down and the other person wins. So to me, when I looked at that, I thought that represents what we're talking about. That if the game, when it's first set up, that's the life that we have. It's all the building blocks. It's all the things that we've learned. It's all the things that we've experienced in our lives. But I'm gonna give you my opinion on it. I think one of the things that's incomplete is I think when people think of their lives, and specifically as they think about deconstruction, I've even heard people say it this way. They'll say things like, I'm deconstructing the church, or I'm deconstructing what my parents taught me, or I'm deconstructing this, as if what they're deconstructing was created by someone else. I would submit to you a different mindset. And the idea that I would submit to you is the thing that you're deconstructing, you created. And I'm not saying that to remove responsibility from someone else, but what I'm saying is you created it because every single one of us is so uniquely different. I mean, you can see siblings that were raised in the same house and yet completely turn out different. So like in a couple of weeks, I will turn 47. When I turn 47, my brother Chris, who's on staff here, he's 48, and my other brother Daniel is 49. So we're really close in age and proximity. But if you look at us, both of us were raised by the same two parents in the same home with the same values, and yet all three of us turned out dramatically different. I mean, I am way better than my brothers. I mean, way better in every measurable way, okay? So my brother's not in this room, but I hope all of you, when you see him, you tell him that, okay? So, but anyways, we turned out different. Why? Because there were different blocks that were given to us. We didn't choose those, but how we assembled them was different. Different based on our experiences, different on our personalities. So my brothers and I, we can talk about religion and we all have different perspectives. We can talk about my parents' parenting and our experience with that, and our experiences were dramatically different. And so again, I'm saying that there's a lot of things that were given to us we didn't choose, the blocks we didn't choose, but how we put them together was like subconscious. We create our own lives. The reason why I'm saying that is then what happens in our lives is as we get older and we begin to experience new things and have interactions with people, and maybe even through the education system, or we're just exposed to new things, is we naturally begin to look at our lives and we begin to test certain things. And sometimes when we test them, we realize that doesn't feel as secure as I thought it once was. You hear a different idea and you go, well, that goes against what I was taught in church growing up, or that goes against what my parents taught me. And so you pull it out and you really have a choice. And the choice is you can critique it, evaluate it, and find something stronger and put it back in its place, or you can get rid of it, and that's what our culture says. Just get rid of it, cancel it, move on to something else. But I think in my experience is that what actually happens is even when people say, I'm gonna get rid of it, there's still a part of it that stays attached. And what happens is just like the game of Jenga, it just gets put on top and it adds more weight and more pressure to their lives because they've never truly processed what it was. And so in our lives, we're constantly in this rhythm. We're constantly just testing things, evaluating things. And when we can find it, we have a choice of what to do with it. And some of the things are good and some of the things are bad, and some of the things have big impact on our lives, and some are smaller. Like I remember as a kid, when I was a kid, I have this super vivid memory. So when I was young, Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger were at basically the peak of their popularity. And so we had like Rocky and Rambo, we had Commando and Predator, and I saw those movies at an age I probably shouldn't have. And so it's amazing what parents will believe when you lie to them. Anyway, so I take that back, Titus. We don't believe anything that any of our kids have to say. But anyway, so as a kid, I remember this. I have this vivid memory. I was in bed and I was thinking about that, and this is the thought I had. I know my dad is the strongest man on earth, but I don't know how he can beat up Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like my mind couldn't process it. And I don't remember when I finally understood, when I finally went through that moment of disillusionment that, oh, my dad isn't the strongest man on earth. But at some point, it had to happen. Now, I will say to my kids, that time has not come for you yet, okay? I got old man strength and a lot of built-up rage. And so, don't test me. All right, but in our lives, there are those moments that we have. Okay, the reason why I say this, you guys get this. I don't need to belabor this. But when we look at this in our lives and we start to pull things out and we start to, handle them, if we don't reconstruct in a solid way, what happens is where we are is weaker than where we began. And I think this is the process that many of us have gone through or are going through. And I think if you can be honest with yourself for a moment and just reflect, I think this idea represents where some of you are in your life. For some of you, you might say, I feel like I'm midway through a Jenga game where I'm not feeling completely unstable. I don't feel like I'm about to fall apart. But if I'm being honest, I am not as secure as I once was. At some point in my life, I felt more secure in my identity and my beliefs. But man, through my experiences, through my life, just things have been unsettled. And so I don't feel completely secure. So that's where you are. I think others would say, you know where I'm at right now is I feel like I am 1 or 2 moves away from the end of a Jenga game. If I'm being honest, even by your response, some of you feel that way, right? Where you're just like, you know what? One more block gets taken out and it's all coming down. Like I just feel that pressure. I feel that frustration, that anxiety, and that's where you're at. And then I think some of you would say, I'm over the game. My life has come falling down. All the parts are laying there. And my life is just, it's in shambles. And that's where you are. And so my question to you would be, what do you think or how do you think Jesus thinks about that? How do you think Jesus, when he sees your life, whether you're midway through, at the end, or it's over, how does Jesus think about it? Well, when we go to the scriptures, what we see is that Jesus understands this dynamic about us. That Jesus understands that life has a way of causing instability in our lives. Not only does life cause instability, but then life attacks us and has the potential to crush us and to destroy us. And so Jesus said something in Matthew 7 that I think is critically important. Jesus says this, he's given us a way, an invitation. I want you to hear this. In Matthew 7, Jesus is giving us an invitation to build something that is solid, something that's unbreakable. And this is what he says. He says, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them would be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against that house and it fell and great was the fall of it. What Jesus was saying in this moment is he's prophetically speaking to every single one of our lives. He's saying, friends, just understand this. Life will cause you to be unstable and then life will attack you. Life's gonna test your foundations. You're going to have storms. And what we understand in our lives is life does have a way of being difficult. There are storms. And so the mental imagery that he's using, he's saying all of us have seen a physical storm. We've seen the devastating effects of it. When wind blows strong enough, it can knock down buildings. We've seen it can throw things. It can remove roofs. We've seen that. We see the power of water. As rain comes down, as floods, waters rise, how it can destroy whole communities, whole cities. We know the devastating effects of hail. So we know a physical storm. And he goes, the same thing can happen in your life. That all of a sudden you experience something, and when your life isn't completely secure, you're a house built on sand, not a house fully built on the rock. He goes, that storm comes in and it crushes you. It takes you down and it destroys all the blocks and it just lays you down into this condition where things are no longer solid, where there's not really even a life there. I mean, his perspective is it comes down with a crash, and how great is that crash? And that is both a statement and a question. How great? I mean, how dramatic is what he's saying is we don't even know the effects of it. And so what Jesus gave was an invitation to build something solid. But I want to just pause. I want to be real with you for a moment. When you first hear what Jesus said, he goes, the person who prepares for the storm is the person who obeys all of my teaching. Let me ask you, when you hear that, how does that hit you? How does that hit your mind and heart? Does it sound like what Jesus is saying is the person who's ready for the storm is the person who takes this list of rules and obeys them? Because I think for many, that's how they view Christianity. And I get it because there have been many pastors through the generations. If I'm being honest, that's how they teach. Every week, let me give you one more rule that you have to do. And if you don't do this rule, God is mad at you and you're gonna burn in hell forever. And that became like a rhythm in the Christian community, even a form of legalism. And so for some, when you hear this teaching of Jesus, it doesn't stir your heart. It doesn't feel like a positive. It feels like he just said, hey, listen, like almost nagging us. Listen, you know the rules. If you just do these rules, your life will be okay. Is that how you hear that? Or do you hear the actual heart in which Jesus delivered this? Because what Jesus was saying is, listen, I see the dynamic of your life and I want to help you. I want to connect relationally. I want to love you. And I want you to understand and to experience that love. And this is what Jesus was teaching. And the reason why I say that is when you go back, so the statement we just read about building our house on the stone, that came at the very end of a long teaching where Jesus was addressing all these different things that he was giving people a new perspective. And all of the things that Jesus was presenting to them were relational things. Well, what he was saying is, if you will take these things, they're going to be different than what was taught you. The world has taught you that this is how you act in relationships, and this is how you act in conflict, and this is how you spend your resources, and this is how you respond in sexuality, and this is what you do, and this and that. He goes, the world has told you all these things, but what you built was unstable, and when the storms came, it all came crashing down. And so what Jesus gives to the audience is, I'm gonna actually tell you how to build. I'm gonna tell you what to do with your life so that the end product is solid and is ready so that when the storm comes. But not only is he giving truth, now hear this, he's not just giving purpose, he's giving his presence. He's saying, and I will be a part of this, because not only when you do these things will you discover how you were designed to live and to operate, but you, when you do these, are going to experience my supernatural blessing. And when you receive the blessing of God in your life, there are few things that can confirm in your heart the reality of God and his love, like his blessing in your life. And God just has told you, and this is, I think, the problem in our culture. Our culture wants God to obey them. Our culture wants God to make sense to them. Our culture wants God to bless their behavior no matter what they do. And God goes, I can't, because I love you. Because what father, think about this, what mother, what parent who loves their children would reward behavior that is destructive to them? You would see that and you would immediately and fairly say, that is an unhealthy parent. And the same thing of God. God goes, I will bless when you walk in obedience, because this is the best way to live. And so I'm gonna give you the Sermon on the Mount in like 2 minutes, okay? We're gonna go through this quickly, but I want to reframe his teaching so that you can understand this isn't Jesus giving a list of rules. This is Jesus inviting people into love, into relationship. And here's where he begins. He begins in what we call the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes are these statements where Jesus is addressing an insecurity that the audience would have had. The audience had been told by their religious leaders that the reason their lives had fallen apart, the reason Rome had come in and conquered them, is they weren't holy enough, they weren't righteous enough, so God basically was disciplining them, had abandoned them. I mean, they were just told over and over, you are less than what God requires. And so this was their mindset. God wanted nothing to do with them until they built their life and got everything in order. And Jesus, God in the flesh, comes and he says the opposite. Jesus immediately says, hey, whatever condition you find yourself in, know this, God can use you and change you in your life. If you're mourning, he can comfort you. If you're poor in spirit, like you're just broken down, he goes, I want you to know the kingdom of heaven is available to you. If you're persecuted because of your faith, rejoice because the prophets were before you. God sees that. I mean, he just comes in and says, I want you to understand what's available to you is the very kingdom of God. That's the beginning of his message. But then he goes on even deeper and he says, not only does God want to be in relationship with you, understand this, God wants to use you as the method to change the world. He tells this initial audience, you are the salt and the light. Salt was used to stop the process of decay with meat. Light illuminates darkness. He's like, the world is decaying and in darkness, you're gonna be the hope for the world. And so he tells them, you have purpose. And then he immediately starts to address the things that would bring devastation in their life. He goes, you've heard it said that when you get angry, this is what you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to murder. He goes, let me just tell you, there's a whole better way below murder, okay? He goes, don't even get angry. Don't allow your heart to be stirred toward this. Why? Is it just some legalistic rule? Or is what Jesus saying to him, let me tell you how your heart is actually designed. Your heart's not designed to hold on to anger. Your heart's not designed to be mad. Your heart's not designed to retaliate. And so Jesus just begins to give them a new perspective. He starts to address things of sexuality. You've heard it said that you're not supposed to commit adultery. He goes, but guys, there's so much more of the heart that matters. He goes, let me actually tell you, don't lust after a person. Because when you do, you're committing adultery in your heart. And he's saying, it's actually your heart that impacts your mind, that impacts your behaviors. So let's begin there. He starts talking about marriage and divorce. In this time period, this is not an exaggeration. If you read the rabbis of this time, men could divorce for any reason. If your wife burned the food, you could divorce her. I'm thankful to say in all my years of marriage, my wife has never done that, so that's why we have a solid marriage, right? Just kidding. No, she actually hasn't burned food. That's not what I'm saying. I realized that there was no way for me to get out of that joke. Okay, but here's what Jesus is saying, and this is true. He's not minimizing the pain of relationships. He's saying, you think the grass is greener on the other side. Maybe it's not. And so he's calling them to pull back from going toward divorce. He starts talking about things of integrity. He's saying, let your, whatever you say, yes be your yes, your no be your no. Like, don't swear on things. Don't be deceptive. Just be a person of integrity. He starts talking about reconciliation versus retaliation. And the world says, man, if someone gets you, get them back. Match their energy. Repay evil for evil. And he goes, no, there's a better way to do this. Actually, he so cares about reconciliation, he would even say, that's more important than worship. If you realize as you're at the altar that you have some issue with someone else, he goes, leave your sacrifice, go and be reconciled before you come and worship God. He's just saying, again, this is how you're designed. This is how your heart is designed to be. He says, you've been told in our culture to hate your enemies. Anyone who lets you down, anyone who opposes you, match that energy, hate them. And he goes, actually, I'll tell you, do you know what's better? To love them. Because when you hate them, when you're unforgiving, it becomes like a cancer in your heart. And he says that just steals you from quality of life. And so he tells them to release them, to forgive them. Again, these are ideas that they had never heard. They never understood. This is not God being legalistic. This is the creator, designer going, let me tell you your heart. Let me tell you your life. Let me tell you the true purpose I have for you. And he goes on and he invites them to be generous to the needy. Don't have a mindset, each to their own. He says, if you see someone in need, help them, encourage them. He talks about prayer. He tells them, I mean, get this, guys. This is God talking to them. He's saying, God doesn't want to be distant. He wants to have communication with you in prayer. He says, and he encourages them, set aside a time every day. Go to a place in privacy and connect to God. Speak to God. God will speak back to you. To cast your cares to him, surrender them. I mean, again, this is a relational God. He talks about finances with them. He says, finances, the world tells you, build bigger houses, have more money in savings, make investments here in this world. He goes, you can do that, but I'm just telling you, it doesn't have the bang for the buck like you think. Instead, advance the kingdom of God, invest in heavenly things. And he talks about anxiety, your stress, know God cares about you. And he goes back to relationships. And then at the very end, he says, okay, but I'm not trying to sugarcoat something. I want you to understand. This does have consequence. And we even sung a song about it today, but he says, here's the consequence. There is a pathway that leads to life. It's narrow, few find it. It's a pathway I'm giving to you, but it leads to life. And when you do these things and you understand the wisdom and you trust me, you're going to experience life. He goes, but the other side of that pathway is it leads to destruction. It's broad and most people go down because it's easy. But what he was saying is this is where that direction ends in lives that are devastated. But if you go this way, together we can build something that will be solid, will be stable. And this is the challenge that we have in our lives. Are we willing to trust Jesus relationally? Are we willing to enter into this relationship, and I want you to hear me, so that you can experience God, that you can experience his love? Because this is the question I would submit to you. What if truth is found when you experience God? Our culture says God has to make sense beforehand. If God's illogical to us, then reject him. And so many a part of the deconstruction movement, when you hear their arguments, this is where they're beginning. God doesn't make sense to me. Friends, I want you to hear me, and I mean this, I'm not being flippant in any way. God will never make full sense to any of us. Do you know that? Life is too complex. There's too many things uncertain. We're going to talk about this next week. But God will never make sense fully to us. So what if we experience truth when we experience God? Let me explain it this way. Over the years, I've been a pastor for 26 years. One of the conversations I actually love, I really do love this. People will come to me and they'll say, hey, I'm looking to find someone. I want to connect relationally. Do you know anyone that's single, that loves God? And honestly, if I do, and I think it's a good match, I have no problem being a matchmaker. My wife and I, we talk about it frequently. Like, again, because we know the value of healthy relationships and godly relationships. But can you imagine if someone came to me and said, hey, do you know someone that's single? I go, oh, I know the perfect person for you. And I start to describe them to you. I start to describe how they look, because I know attraction matters. And I describe like their personality, what they do for a living. I just start giving you facts about them. And imagine that person comes back and goes, okay, I got some more questions. I go, all right, shoot, give me them. They give me more questions. I go back and I'm kind of like the go-between, and I tell them the answers. And then what if they were like, all right, so what are some good things that they've done? And I tell them, and they go, okay, what are some bad things that they've done? And I tell them, and they go, okay, what do they learn from that? And I tell them, and I'm the go-between of those things. Can we all agree that they can get connected to a point, but it's gonna be really shallow? Information about someone is not the same thing as information with them in relationship to experience them. So if I said to this person, hey, you know what? I'm not gonna answer any more of your questions. Instead, here's what I wanna do. I want you guys to come together. And I want you to start hanging out. And I want you face to face to have conversations and to ask each other about your past and just to experience each other's personality. To see what makes them laugh, what makes them happy, what settles their spirit, just hang out. And I think we all would agree if two people did this and they actually connected, that relationship would be deeper, that they would have a better understanding of each other. And this is what God is inviting us into. You can reduce them down to information like our culture is trying to do, but you'll never discover the true value of what it means to be in a relationship with God. And this is what Jesus wants. He wants a relationship with you. The reason why I know this is because later on, after Jesus did this exhaustive teaching that we looked at today, he continued to teach. He continued to give the commands of God. And one day someone came up to him and they said, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? Like, what's the most important thing that we can do? And Jesus answered, he goes, that's easy. The most important thing you can do, the greatest of all commandments, is to love God with everything you have, with all your mind, soul, strength, and body, right? No, mind's 4 things, and they're really important, okay? Your heart, your mind, your body, and spirit, I think is the 4. I nailed it the first service. I have that scripture memorized. Isn't it weird how you can know something and your brain just goes, anyone? Okay. If you've never experienced that, you will someday. All right. And it will be like a storm. You'll do it in front of a bunch of people, and it will just be embarrassing. No, I'm just kidding. All right, anyway, let me get back. So he goes, the most important thing is to love God with all that you have. And he says the second thing is like it, to love people. And then he says this powerful statement. He goes, every single thing that God has ever spoken, all the prophets, all his commands, all of his law, all of it hinges on you doing that, loving God and loving people. So it's super easy to hear that and to read it and go, okay, what Jesus is saying is the way that you love God is to follow a bunch of rules. To do it with your mind, your heart, your soul, strength. Like, to do it is just following a bunch of rules. But I want you to remember everything that Jesus said. Because in John chapter 3, at the beginning of his ministry, where we looked at this on Easter, Jesus had a conversation with Nicodemus and he said to him, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Jesus, that's the one who's talking. He gave Jesus that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. Here's what Jesus said. God loved you first. God so loved the world, not because the world had been walking in obedience, not because the world had built their life and got everything in order, and so he loved them and he sent Jesus, just the opposite. God looked down from heaven and this is what he saw, and God so loved that he sent his son Jesus, who willfully, joyfully came. And so Jesus says, God loved you first, so the greatest thing you can ever do is to love the God who loved you first. And this is, again, relationship. It's relational. To love God who loved you first. Can we put that truth up there? That this is the heart of God. This is what Jesus is saying. God's not trying to be a list of rules. God's not trying to be a distant God. God's not trying to be abstract. He's trying to build a relationship. But the way you discover it is to go to him and say, okay, I trust you. I believe in you. I want to walk your pathway. And when you do, what happens is we strip away all the lies that the world has told us, all the things that don't make sense. And relationally, we begin to build with God, something that is real, something that is solid, something that is relational. And so that's my question for you today. Will you be willing to do this wherever you are? If there are things that have been unsettled in your life, there have been blocks that have been stripped away, things that don't make sense, things about God that frustrate you, confuse you, have hurt you, let you down. Are you willing to say to God, God, Jesus, will you meet me here? Are you willing to take the pain and go to him and say, I need you to address this. This doesn't make sense. Being willing to be real with him, to be raw with him. Scripture tells us he's already searched your heart. He already knows what's going on. You're not informing him of something, you're acknowledging something he already knows. And when you do that, you're inviting him to supernaturally move in that situation. This is what Jesus was inviting us into. Will you trust me and do this so that you can experience my presence, my blessing, my truth, so that you can build something that actually is secure? And so friends, this is what I'm asking. Will you do that today? Will you do that this week? Will you continue to come in this series as we layer this truth week after week so that what we can have in the end is something solid? We can deconstruct what is broken to reconstruct what is good. Will you bow your heads? And as you think about your life and where you are right now, what is hurting? What's confused? Where has God disappointed you? Where has God confused you? Where has God done something unexpected? Where has your life gone in a direction that you were not anticipating and your heart hurts? Maybe you don't even blame God. Maybe you're just hurting. Maybe you blame yourself. Who knows what it is? But whatever that is, right now, will you just say to Jesus, I need you here. I need you to help me here. I need you to speak to me here. I need to feel your presence here. I need to feel your love. My experience is that Jesus meets us. Whenever we invite him, we meet him. Jesus, will you help everyone here, everyone in Logan, everyone watching online? Will you help them to understand you're a real God, but you're not just real, you're real loving. You're kind. And you have a purpose. And God, you are mysterious. Your ways are confusing. They're frustrating to us because we can't see the way that you see. So when we feel that, will you give us your presence, your peace that you've promised? Help us to cast our cares to you. And Jesus, we thank you. We thank you that you don't give up on us. We thank you that you have a good plan, that you give us grace upon grace. And so be with us this week as we, as a church, wrestle through this. This week, the upcoming weeks as we go through this series, help us to deconstruct everything that is false, everything that is sinful, everything that is broken, everything that's incomplete. But help us to reconstruct with your truth. And Jesus, we thank you in advance. We give you all the glory. And we pray this in your precious name. Amen.